Hi everyone, happy Tuesday. Thanks for joining me for yet another installment of my live Q&A. My name is Amanda Augustine and I'm the career expert for TopResume, Top Interview, and Top CV. All of these brands that are working hard to help you tell the best version of your career story and help you land that job sooner. As always, I'm hoping to do a little bit of giving of job tips in the beginning, and then as well, I'd like to answer any questions that are coming in. And granted, each one of these talks, I try to dedicate it to a specific topic. What is my hair doing, guys? Can we talk about this? Each week I try to dedicate one of these to a specific topic, but that said, I'll answer questions about anything related to the job search. So if you don't have a question that's relevant to the talk at hand, that's okay. If I have the time, I will 100% get to it and answer your question. So thanks so much for joining me. Today's talk is dedicated to resume tips. I really want to talk about how do the applicant tracking systems work, what can you do to try and beat those quote unquote hiring bots, the mistakes that we know employers hate that you can easily avoid with a little care, as well as some tips for framing your resume for remote work. So I'm going to delve into one of those, and then depending on what questions I'm seeing and what you'd like to hear about, we'll target the conversation from there. Before we get started though, I would like to make a couple of announcements. First, I'd like to share that TopResume is currently selecting a new winner for its free resume makeover contest every week for a 6-week period. Normally we do this every other month or so, but we're actually going to do it for 6 weeks in a row. Because we want to help as many people as possible during this tough time. We selected our first winner this past Friday, Rhonda E, and we'll be selecting another winner later this week. So if you haven't already, you only need to register once. You want to submit for that or enter that free resume makeover contest at topresume.com/resume-makeover. And I know my colleague's going to also put that link in the comments below. Second, if you'd like to learn more in-depth job search strategies, later today I'm holding a webinar from the alumni of my alma mater, Marist College. Go Red Foxes! And I'm going to be giving an hour talk on different job search strategies. So a little more in-depth than what we do here, and I'll have a webinar up so you can see that information. You do not have to be an alumnus of Marist College in order to attend. There's a link for maristconnect.marist.edu that my colleague's going to put up. So if you would like to register for the event, or if you don't have time to register and you just want to show up at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to participate in the webinar, you can go straight to their website and join me there. Now that we've got all that out of the way, I'd like to get to the topic at hand, resume tips. And last week's chat, I was trying to go the direction of interview strategies, and frankly, it was very clear everyone really wanted to talk about resume. And so I figured let's dedicate today's chat to resume tips, answering your resume questions. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Amanda Augustine, resident career expert for TopResume and our sister sites, Top Interview and Top CV. Today, I'm hoping to share some resume tips and then answer any questions you may have, whether it's about resume writing or any other part of the job search process. Okay. So let's dive in and talk about writing a resume to beat the hiring bots. And if you see my eyes kind of switching to the side, I actually gave myself some notes because this is a pretty in-depth conversation and I know a lot of people care a lot about it. And so I wanted to make sure I kind of got in all the main points, and hopefully in a relatively short period of time so we have more time for Q&A this time around. So what the heck is an ATS? Let's start simple. ATS stands for Applicant Tracking Software, or Applicant Tracking System. It's a piece of software that was originally created in the late 90s, and it was more so for large organizations that were suddenly receiving this influx of applications, because this is also coincides with around the time that all the big job boards came out. So Monster, Career Builder, Hot Jobs, they all came out in 94, 95, 96, around that time. And suddenly these companies, these recruiters, were getting this inundation of applications that they were not accustomed to, because it was suddenly very easy, or much easier to find job listings and apply for them. So of course, what happened? Now the companies said, oh, I can't handle all this. I can't manage this large influx of applications. We know even today that the average job listing receives 250 applications. I would be interested to know what's going on now for the jobs that are currently available. I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers have increased quite a bit, just given how many people are currently unemployed. So keeping that in mind, in the late 90s, they built this software known as an applicant tracking system. Something to keep in mind is that the ATS was designed to whittle down the pile of applications to a manageable number. It's much better at trying to discard what it deems as the least qualified candidates. It's not as great at as necessarily identifying the best qualified candidates or the best match. And that's something to keep in mind. The software continues to evolve. Thanks to AI recruiting tools, artificial intelligence, a lot of those tools can work within a company's existing ATS system. They are getting a bit smarter, a bit more sophisticated, but let's face it, they're still not fantastic. And if your resume isn't written with this electronic gatekeeper in mind, you could be very qualified for the role, but your application may never see the light of day. On average, 75% of all online applications are never reviewed by a human being, because either they apply really late and the recruiter or hiring manager already has their pile that they want to look at and that's what they're working on, or it was discarded thanks to one of these applicant tracking systems. And I do get a lot of questions about, well, does really everybody use one? Do I really have to care about this if I'm looking for work in this type of company versus that type of company? Something to keep in mind. When applicant tracking systems first came out on the market, they were 100% geared towards very large organizations that had, loads of job listings that they were trying to fill. And as a result, if you have loads of job listings and all these applications, of course, it's a lot more to manage. That said, it really has changed that companies of all shapes and sizes are starting to use different types of applicant tracking software, and just different degrees or differing degrees. If you're looking for a job in a Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company, you might as well assume that they're using an applicant tracking system. There's two stats that are floating out there. One says 95%, one says 98%. I think the moral of the story is that the overwhelming majority of Fortune 500 companies use an applicant tracking system to manage their recruitment and candidate selection process. Now, if you are trying to find your job through networking, and you hear me say that all the time, right? You're 10 times more likely to land the job when your application is accompanied by a referral. If you can talk to somebody and pass your resume along, you always stand a better chance of not only getting an interview, but actually landing the job. That said, if the company uses an applicant tracking system, they're probably still going to tell you you have to apply through the system, even if you're handing your application to me. And so one thing, and I learned this on a webinar actually fairly recently, is that even if you have an inside track, if that company is a large enough company that they all use an applicant tracking system, your application, when going through the ATS, still has to receive a certain score, a high enough score in the system for them to want to talk to you, because they have to justify that you are indeed qualified based on what their system is saying, and it's not just a favor to a coworker. So something to keep in mind is, the moral of the story is, Doesn't matter how you think you're going to be passing your resume along. It does not hurt, and it can only help you if you are writing your resume and crafting it in a way that you're keeping these electronic gatekeepers in mind. Trying to think if there are any other really good stats that I should share with you to help you frame this for you. I think we'll just move on if it's all right with everybody. I want to move into some tips, some of the specific stuff that talks about, okay, well, how in the world do you make sure that your resume is indeed ATS friendly? And we have some great articles on this, so if you're looking for follow-up material, we can certainly pass those along as well. I actually gathered a few links that I think will be really useful to everybody, and so my colleague will be entering those into the comments as I'm talking, and so grab those, paste them somewhere, keep them in mind. If you go to topresume.com and click on career advice, you can go to our blog, and if you search for ATS from any one of the articles, you'll find most of what I'm going to be touching upon, but in really great detail with extra hyperlinks to help you out. So a few things to keep in mind when you're trying to beat the ATS, the hiring bots, those little awful, I don't want to curse, but things we hate. Okay, a couple things to keep in mind. Not every applicant tracking system can parse and read an application that comes in a PDF file. I know there's a lot of debate over, should I submit my resume as a Word document or should I submit it as a PDF? Most people say we like the PDF because it keeps your design and your format intact, regardless of whose hands it passes on to, right? I do like PDFs. However, not every applicant tracking system can read a PDF document. And so if you're submitting your application online, and it's clear they're either making you set up a login, they want you to upload the resume and then verify pieces of information, that sort of thing. When you know it's very clear that you're applying for a job and it's taking you into their applicant tracking system, when they ask you to upload your resume, if they don't specify that it accepts PDF documents, play it safe and give them a Word document version of your resume. And that's really important to keep in mind. Word document is always 2 thumbs up with applicant tracking systems. PDFs, it depends, and so play it safe if you don't know. If push comes to shove and you don't know, always submit it as a Word document. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. If you're just joining me, my name is Amanda Augustine. I'm the resident career expert for TopResume, as well as our sister brands, Top Interview and Top CV. And today I'm talking all about resume tips. And right now, specifically, I'm talking about what are things to keep in mind when you're writing your resume to make sure that you're going to make it past those hiring bots, known as the applicant tracking system, a piece of recruitment software that a large number of organizations use in order to sort, organize, and even prioritize specific candidates when they're trying to fill a position. So we talked about how you want to submit your resume as a Word document unless the software specifically says it will accept PDF documents. Something else to keep in mind, if you're using that Word document, do not place important details such as your contact information in the footer or header, let's try that again, header or footer sections of the Word document. Are you gonna have your contact information typically at the top of your resume? 100%. I specifically recommend that you do that. However, when you're in a Word document, you know how you can double click and it takes you into the header section, such as the header footer? You do not want to place your information there. You want to place it below that, just at the top of your document. The reason being is that for whatever reason, the applicant tracking systems will often not be able to read that information, or if they do, it ends up in other parts of your resume when it goes through the system. And as a result, it may get lost and they may not be able to identify what is your contact information and things of that nature. So you don't want those important details, getting lost. I have had people ask, well, what about on the second page of my resume? If I have multiple pages, can I use the header or footer there? Yes, but that's typically because you're putting it's page 2 and maybe you're reiterating your name. You're not putting anything that's really important. The contact information needs to be on that first page, and that's the spot where you definitely do not want it to be in a header or the footer, which is at the bottom of the document. All right, Everyone with me? Can you tell? I've only had about a cup of coffee, guys, and I'm still going. So let me know in the comments if you want me to slow down, if there's anything specific that I've touched upon that you would like me to go deeper on, or you have questions about, anything you want me to follow up on. Please post your questions in the comments section below. My goal is to only talk for about half of the hour and then save the other half for specifically answering questions. If you're just joining me, my name's Amanda Augustine. I'm the resident career expert for TopResume and our sister brands, Top Interview and Top CV. And today I'm sharing resume tips specifically on how you can beat the applicant tracking system, also known as the hiring bots or the electronic gatekeeper. And then I have lots of other resume tips I'm happy to go into if anybody wants me to speak specifically to something. So we talked about using a Word document when it does not specify that it can accept a PDF. When in doubt, play it safe. 2 is never put important details into the header or footer, specifically on the first page of your resume, because that's where you would where you'd normally put your contact details, your phone number and stuff like that. Put it at the top of your resume, don't put it in the header section. Something else to keep in mind when it comes to the design and format, the layout of your resume, really less is more here. Don't go nuts trying to make this super fancy, intricate design. Because the fancier you get, the more customized it is, the more likely it's not going to parse well when it goes through an applicant tracking system. And what I mean by parsing is that when you upload your resume for one of these applications, the software is basically reading the information on your resume and trying to decipher, this is what we think their name is, this is what we think their email address is, this is what we think their first job was, their phone number, the email address, all that kind of stuff. It's trying to take that information and then pull it apart into a form on the back end. And based on what it's finding there, it's also looking for specific keywords and things like that. Based on what it's finding there, it's determining if you are not a good fit, not qualified for the role, and you're going to be discarded, or if you're going to be put in the pile that will be at the top of the list for a human being to review. When I talk about less is more, go simple, you want a clean resume layout. So a couple things to keep in mind. You don't want to necessarily be pasting in images. The ATS can't read an image. So if you have a really cool way that you do your name or something like that, or you're inserting a chart that talks about these are your top skills, and you have it in like a pie chart or something like, I've seen some really fancy special things going on there. Unfortunately, that will all be obliterated when it goes through the applicant tracking system. It can't read an image. It can't read what's in the image. And so you want to stay away from those things. If you are in a creative field and you're looking at your resume and saying, yeah, but this doesn't reflect my brand, this doesn't reflect who I am, my answer to that is save it for your online portfolio. If you're in a creative field, I would hope that you have some sort of online website that you're using to showcase the visual representation of your work. Think of the resume as more of, this is the story we're telling, this is how we're talking about your qualifications, the types of work you've done, what were your responsibilities, what was the output based on the responsibilities you held, but you're going to point someone to the website that's going to have that visual representation of your creativity. So I know it can feel stifling if you're a very creative person to have a document that seems just kind of very clean and it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles to it, but actually this is an easier format. Put the applicant tracking system aside. We know that the average recruiter or hiring manager spends less than 10 seconds looking at a resume before he or she decides whether they're going to place it in the no pile, the reject pile, or place it in the pile of, I'm going to look at this more closely. You don't want them hunting for your pieces of information because frankly, they still have a stack to go through, even if it is online. And they're not going to take the time and sit there and try and, squint and read through your information and decipher it. So save the creativity for your portfolio, stick to a cleaner type of design. So things to keep in mind that are specific to the applicant tracking system. Applicant tracking systems favor a clear hierarchy of information. What do I mean by that? I mean that, you know, the subheads for the different parts of your resume, work experience, skills, education, things like that, you want them formatted all the same. You want the companies all formatted the same way. You want the dates all next in the same spot next to each role. You basically want it to be very consistent. You know, consider that it's reading down and looking at your information. Something I learned recently, because I was always kind of very wary of creating columns on resumes, but you'll see a lot of people put columns, you know, either they'll have like a main section and there's a column on the left-hand side or a column on the right-hand side, or they may have multiple ones where they're putting different pieces of information. An applicant tracking system can properly read and parse a resume when you're using a left-hand column and then the main body of your resume. If you put a right-hand column in, it can't read that. I wish I could explain why. I do not know. All I know is that if you want something that looks a little bit more modern in terms of the look and feel of your resume, stick to a format that uses a left side column and then the main area. Don't use one that has a right side column, because we know that's not applicant tracking system friendly. That's a tongue twister. Other things to keep in mind: custom fonts, custom bullets, anything where it's custom and it's not standard, assume that an applicant tracking system will have trouble reading it and it may become garbled. If you're inserting hyperlinks on your resume, which I do think are important, if you have a great portfolio or blog, you want to send them there. You want to include the link to your LinkedIn profile. There may be some other things where you may put a link here or there. Something to keep in mind is that it will read the URL, it will lose the name that you give that URL. And so, you know, which may or may not matter, but be careful. You would never want to, you know, have a bullet that talks about how you achieved 150% of your quota by implementing this new marketing strategy or something like that, or you created a new, if you hyperlinked that whole line to maybe like an example on your website, they would lose that bullet point. All they would get is the URL when the system is parsed. So be very careful. If you're gonna hyperlink data within your resume, you wanna hyperlink, fine, it can say blog or portfolio or something like that, where the word no one cares about. They'll understand when they look at the link. You would never want to, in the body of when you're describing your work experience or something like that, you would never want to hyperlink a piece of information that's really important for them to actually read and see, especially if the link is just a supplement. Does that make sense? Is everyone with me on that? When it comes to, so, I mean, at the top, if you're putting in your LinkedIn profile, it's fine if you name it LinkedIn or if you want to put the whole URL, either way that works. But when you're talking about your work experience, you don't want to go hyperlinking in there. That's where it's a piece of content, because you don't want to lose that information. Okay, I'm going down into my notes, guys, and I want to be really cognizant of time. Okay, here's the big one. We talk about this all the time, and this is one of the big things that at TopResume we really boast about, that we're good at helping you optimize your resume with keywords. This is probably one of the big things. Assuming there's nothing crazily off with your format, that's going to hurt your application or have part of it misread. The next big step, now that we know that it can be parsed, is making sure that you're including the right keywords so that the system does not deem you unqualified for the role. Because I hate to say it, but you could be very qualified for a job, and if you're not optimizing your application appropriately, you may end up with a low score and not be in the running, and a human being will never look at your resume and say, oh, of course they're qualified. So this is really important to keep in mind. When you're creating your base resume, the primary one that you're then going to slightly tweak and evolve as you're customizing it for a specific application, what I recommend doing is finding 3 to 5 job listings that describe the type of role that you're interested in pursuing and you feel you're qualified for. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, of course, if these are 5 completely different jobs, you're in trouble. You can't necessarily create a base document that works for 5 completely different career tracks. So part of this process is forcing you to narrow your job goals and narrow what specific type of role you're going after. There can be some wiggle room there, but you do want to find 3 to 5 job listings that accurately describe a role that you'd be interested in pursuing and you feel you're qualified for. And you don't have to actually want to apply to that job. Maybe it's in a location that you never want to work in. Maybe it's across the country and they don't seem to offer remote work, for the long term, that sort of thing. Don't worry about location at this point. We're just looking for job descriptions that can help act as a guide for when you're optimizing your resume. So take those job listings and you can go old school or you can use technology. The old school way is to print them out, grab a highlighter and start highlighting the important pieces of information that are popping up, a certain piece of experience that keeps getting mentioned, a requirement that they're asking for. Anything that's required, maybe desired, anything like that where you're seeing these words throughout the job description. And what you're really looking for is patterns. You're looking for how many of these job descriptions are mentioning the same responsibility, the same prerequisite experience, the same qualifications, the same requirements. Identify, highlight all of them and start kind of, circling or starring the ones that seem to be routinely popping up. Maybe they're worded slightly differently. That's actually important to keep in mind. You want to make note of that. And then put a check mark or circle or in some way identify which ones you possess. Of all these skills that they keep mentioning, how many of those do you actually have? Of all the previous experience they want or pieces of software that they want you to be familiar with, put a check mark next to those. Now take that information and figure out, well, where could that fit in my resume? Where could I talk about? Where did I leverage that skill? Where did I use this? What is this kind of a softer word, one of those softer, fluffier type of words that maybe I could work into my professional summary? Which ones would work well for my areas of expertise or key skills? Which ones can I work into my work experience or even my education where I can point to it and make sure it gets inserted in there? You want to actually take the verbiage exactly as it appears in those job listings and work it into your resume. And if you're seeing slight differences in how that term is worded from one job listing to another, you're trying to fit multiple ones in, or at least be aware of where you're putting that. Go with the one that most of the job descriptions use. And then keeping in mind that you may need to tweak that language for a specific application to make sure that you're lining up. It's really crazy, but it does have a lot to do with exactly how are they saying things in that in that job listing, and how can I regurgitate those same details, but in a way that's smart and makes sense and accurately reflects who I am as a professional, what my skill set is, and what previous experience I possess. Does that make sense to everyone? The optimization is really key. Now, I'll talk about that a little bit more because there are some interesting details there, but before I go into more about customizing your resume with keywords, of all the tips I mentioned where it had to do more with the formatting of your resume, the file selection, the way things are lined up, if you want to determine whether your resume is quote unquote ATS friendly today, there are 2 things you can do. One, you can submit for a free resume review, and I might add, if you enter our free resume makeover contest, as part of entering the contest, you will receive a free resume review. So whether you enter the contest or you just go to TopResume and request a free resume review, part of our review actually says, this is what the applicant tracking system thinks are your top skills. This is what it thinks your name, your contact information, your most recent job, your education. This is what it thinks those things are. If you look at that and it's totally wrong and it's not necessarily accurately describing you, then you know there's some rejiggering that needs to happen on that resume. Another way that you can test how ATS friendly your resume is, get a plain text document. I use Notepad on my laptop. I'm sure there's a few different systems you can use for this, but you basically want to Control-All or Command-All, copy the contents of your resume and paste it into the plain text document, and then take a look at the results. if suddenly headers are all in weird spots and they're not actually next to the information that they represent, if your contact information is jumped around, if you're seeing weird symbols, or if information is suddenly missing, you're like, I know I put this into my resume and it's not here, then you know that your resume is going to have some issues when it goes through an applicant tracking system. So that's really important to keep in mind. If you run those two tests, you'll have a really good sense of, how readable is my resume in an applicant tracking system, and have I optimized it properly so that the ATS system is picking up on my key skills and my areas of expertise. All right, so going back just a little bit, I want to be cognizant of time. We're at about that half-hour mark, and I do want to save a lot of time for questions. If you have questions, now's the time to enter them in the comments, because I'm going to start going through those. But something to keep in mind is that different applicant tracking systems work in different ways. And so it's really hard for me to say, well, this is how this one works and this is how that one works. They're all slightly different, so you kind of are trying to cover your bases. When you find a word, if a word is popping up multiple times in the same job listing, so maybe you're customizing your resume for one specific job application, or maybe you're still creating that foundational document, and then from there you will, tweak certain things. The more frequently a term shows up in a job description, the more likely it's considered important, because they felt the need to say it multiple times in their job listing. That means you probably want to make sure you're also working it in more than once into your resume. There's different systems kind of give you a rating for different placements. Some of them assign, so this is really interesting. Some applicant tracking systems, but not all, if you get that keyword into a piece of your work experience, something from your work history, for however long you were at that job, the system recognizes your tenure at that position. It assumes or attributes that you have that many years or that many months of experience in that skill. How crazy is that? Some of them, it's how frequently does it show up. Some of them, it's if it's in the key skills section, which is typically worked in just below your professional summary, kind of before you hit into your work experience, you get a point for that. Maybe, I want to say, don't quote me on this, I think it's 6 months, you get 6 months there. And then if it's in with the work experience, then you're getting more. But again, it all depends on the system. I think the rule of thumb is you just want to make sure that if it seems to be an important word, it's a hard skill, it's practical experience, less so they say the word visionary twice, they say the word creative 3 times. Those fluffier, softer skill things, yeah, get the word in there, great. If it pops up a bunch of times on their job listing, sure, work it into your resume somewhere, but be more concerned about the harder technical skills and the actual practical experience that they're looking for. That's the stuff that you're really trying to nail when it comes to the keywords. Those are the primary tips. We do have a great article that basically summarizes or goes deeper into what I talked about, where how can I tell if my resume is ATS friendly? We have a really great article that I wrote on that, and I think I actually inserted a video on that one as well. And then we have a really long, in-depth article on what is an ATS, and it goes into every little nuance that I'm aware of that I could place into an article about applicant tracking systems and writing a resume to beat the applicant tracking system. So definitely take a look at those. I'm gonna start scrolling through now and answering some of these questions. Let me start at the top. Okay. Hi, Eric. Thanks so much for joining me. Hey, Oliver. I've seen some people writing that objectives on a CV. Is that necessary? Okay, great. So whether it's a CV or a resume, we don't really call it an objective anymore. Objectives are typically very short, very personal. And by personal, I mean, it's more about your wants and needs and less about what you can offer to an employer. So I do think you need something there, but not necessarily what we would call the typical objective statement, because most objective statements have a lot of fluffy words in them. It's a lot of adjectives. There's not a lot of meat. It typically focuses more on, I'm looking for a place where I can leverage my skills and provide value and grow and advance. You know, it's very generic, and so it doesn't really tell you anything. I would replace that with a professional summary. It's also known as a personal statement. You typically hear it referred to as a personal statement overseas. In the US, it's more frequently referred to as either a professional summary or an executive summary. And 100%, I think you should have one. It's rare that you wouldn't have one on your resume or CV. It's typically 3 to 5 lines. It could be in paragraph form. It could be in bullet point form or format. And think of it as your elevator pitch. You are summarizing for the reader what you're great at, what you're passionate about, and why are you qualified to do the type of role you're targeting. So it's very clearly, you know, you're trying to sum up either your years of experience, what industries you have experience in, what skills are your strongest, and more importantly, how have you leveraged those to provide positive outcomes for your employer, whether that's launching brand campaigns, increasing brand loyalty, you know, improving the bottom line in some way, shape, or form. You're always trying to bring it back to, this is what I am, and these are the skills I possess, and I have used these skills to do X, Y, and Z for these types of companies. So, you know, quote unquote, why wouldn't you want to hire me? Use it as that area. It sets the tone for the rest of the document. Think of it that way. It's really setting the stage, whetting their appetite, so they want to spend more than 10 seconds reviewing the rest of your application and keeping you, you know, in the running. So that's a great question. Jenna, my dear colleague, if you can find the article on both Top CV and the article we have on Top Resume that talks about personal statements and professional summaries, if we could get one of those into the comments, I think that would be great. I think Oliver would like that one. All right. Eric. Yes, I'm a very big fan of coffee. So I have to say, I've been so excited to be able to support my local business. I go to a coffee shop that's down the road from my house, and he's had to switch to online, and bless his heart. So I stocked up on coffee and had a ground before COVID hit. I just kind of saw what was happening. I was like, oh, I need my coffee. But I actually, he's started doing stuff online. You can email him and place an order. So actually, I'm expecting some bags of coffee later today, and I'm really excited. Love this question. Less is more. What about a 2-page resume? Oh, there's so much debate over page length when it comes to a resume or a CV. What's interesting is, thanks to all the protection laws that are coming into place, especially overseas when it comes to, I can't even remember the name of it. I think I've blocked it from my head because it was a super fun time to organize stuff at our company. But in terms of holding on to personal information and that sort of thing, companies, you know, don't want some of the details they used to be into, especially overseas. The bottom line is that CVs are actually becoming more like resumes as time goes on. Their formats are becoming more and more similar. Which makes sense because they both use the same applicant tracking systems, which were developed in the US, and things of that nature. And also, we're becoming a more global civilization and a global workforce. 2 pages. 2 pages is typically what you're aiming for, whether you have 7 years of experience or 17 years of experience. And I know how much people love when I say this, because some people want 1 page and some people think it should be many, many pages. Now, there are exceptions to this rule 100%. What I like to point to is that there was a study done, I don't know, maybe about a year and a half ago now, by a company called Resume Go. And they analyzed all these resumes. It was thousands of resumes, if I remember correctly, and they had hundreds of recruiters participating in this study. And what they found is that recruiters preferred a 2-page resume 2.3 times over a 1-page resume. Now, I found that interesting because normally entry-level professionals, somebody fresh out of school, we always said, nope, only 1 page, that's all you got. You don't have a lot to work with. I've now amended my take on that based on what I've learned. Here's the deal. If you were somebody who was in school and you were very active and you did co-ops and internships and you were part of 7 different organizations where you held leadership titles and you had this great volunteer experience, if you have enough information to warrant going to a second page, go for it. If you don't try and fill your resume with fluff to make it to a second page. That defeats the purpose. Now, for those of you who have oodles and oodles of experience and great things to brag about, and you're sitting there saying, yeah, right, Amanda, there's no way in hell I will ever be able to get my resume down to 2 pages. Okay, there is. There 100% is. You want to stick to only really highlighting the last 10 to 15 years of your experience. Why? Because unfortunately, as much as you may have a very personal, attachment to some of that information, recruiters care about what you've done most recently that aligns, supports, is relevant to the role they're filling, not what you necessarily did 20 plus years ago. And so you're gonna focus on your most recent experience. Anything before that, there are a couple different ways you can add that. We have a really great article, and Jenna, if you could provide it, it's on the article I wrote on, how long should your resume be? I not only talk about the exceptions to the rules, and there definitely are exceptions. If you are applying for a job in the US federal government, you have to have what's known as a federal resume. It follows a different format. It is always longer. If you work in academia, any of the sciences, 100% your resume is going to be longer because you're going to have all those publications and all those presentations and all the medical, those are longer. But for the average professional that either was very active during their college career before they graduated or has been out of school for a number of years, 2 pages is what we're typically trying to stick to. You can either write a career note that's short, and then put a short little paragraph in there. Again, a blurb, 3 sentences max, that says, earlier experience includes roles as blank and blank at companies like X, Y, and Z, whatever you want to name drop that you think is important because you want it on your resume because you know it's impressive. And then you'd say additional details available upon request. Or if you have a series of jobs in the past and you would like to show how you've worked up into, the first position you really, flesh out on your resume, then you could have a subsection that's called earlier career experience, earlier work experience, earlier professional experience, earlier work history, something like that. And you would write the job title, the company name, and the location. And you don't include dates. You don't need to include dates. It's actually part of this age proofing thing that we do to resumes so that you are not being discriminated against based on your age. So you want to stick to highlighting the most recent information. Great question. I know my colleague put in that link. It's a really good one. Save it for LinkedIn maybe. Oh yes, you know what, that's another thing to keep in mind, because a traditional resume and one that works well in an applicant tracking system can be kind of black and white and not so fun, that sort of thing. If you're trying to show a bit more of your personality, your personal website or your LinkedIn profile is a great place to do that. I always say your LinkedIn is a social media site, right? It's a social media platform. So you get to be more social, so you get to show a bit more of your personality. Just like in the summary on LinkedIn, I think it's fine and cool to use pronouns, say, I did this, I started, this is why I'm passionate about this is how I got interested, what draws me to this. You can get a lot more like that on your LinkedIn summary. You can't necessarily do as much or take as much creative license with the professional summary on your resume unless you're specifically customizing it for a particular job listing and you've done your research on that company and you know that they're kind of think outside the box, kind of avant-garde, a little quirky, so you can get away with that. You can incorporate more of that personality stuff though into your cover letter. Hey Nisso, thanks for joining. All right. Oh, Oliver, I love that you like these tips. Hey William, I am hitting see more so I can read the rest of yours. If you're planning on experimenting with approaches in these days of remote work, oh, you're willing to be a test subject. Oh, that's so sweet of you. Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, you know what? It might be time for a tune-up. I've heard that from a few people. If you haven't updated your resume in a while, especially if you had a certain format, particularly you graduate from college, you went to career services, they help you set up your resume, it worked for a while and now it's not working. Couple things. Certain practices have changed. The way that you formatted in the past won't necessarily do you justice if you are now going into a more managerial role or director level role. You know, you have to start switching it. It's less about describing your tasks and responsibilities and more about using the bullet points to call attention to what I call your bragging points. I always say bullet points equal bragging points. What is the most important information, the most brag-worthy details you can share about that role? Either it's if you don't have a role where there's a lot of accomplishments to talk about, it's more about the most important things you did that if you weren't there, they wouldn't get done. And so that's why you're so important there. Things that demonstrate why you were good at the job you did. So maybe you were given the responsibility of training new hires, or you helped with recruiting or interviewing, or if you're a waiter or a bartender, you got the best shifts. Those things help define, hey, I'm really good at what I do. If you have a job where it's easier to demonstrate the value you bring, either because you're meeting and beating certain goals, you're delivering projects on time, you know, under budget, those sorts of things, that's what you save the bullet points for, because your eye is naturally drawn to the bullet points, right? So you don't want to just have, in your professional experience, paragraph upon paragraph upon paragraph. And you don't want endless bullet points where every single thing is bulleted and it's long, because in both cases, our eyes glaze over. And recruiters and hiring managers are human beings, and their eyes are going to glaze over too. Think about how many resumes they look at. So use the bullet points as a design feature to draw attention to the most important pieces of information that you want the reader to absorb, especially when they're quickly glancing through your resume. Do employment gaps impact the value of your resume? And Megan wants to know about this too. Okay, employment gaps. We do have a really great article on this, both on TopResume specific to a resume, and then on TopInterview, we have a really great article on how do you talk about resume gaps or employment gaps when you actually get to the interview stage of the game. Okay. Yes, employers would rather see that you have this beautiful history with not huge gaps of unemployment between jobs, right? Of course, that's what they'd like to see. Do I think they're a bit more understanding these days? Yeah, I think so. I think especially now, everyone has an extra level of understanding. And so if you were laid off right before COVID or during COVID, I don't think you really have to be that concerned. I talked about this last week, and I'll bring it up again because I think it's just fantastic. Someone shared this, I think, on LinkedIn, maybe on Facebook too. It's been shared around a bit. There's this meme, it's a little cartoon of a person being interviewed, and the hiring manager, recruiter is looking at a resume and says, oh, I see you had a gap in your employment in 2020. What did you do during that time? And the person answers, washing my hands. I'm like, oh God, so sad, but it's true. So what can you do about the gaps in your employment? So yes, they do affect it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They'd rather see that you were gainfully employed all the time, but it is what it is. You can't get rid of it. If somebody was away for a large portion of time, I'm talking years, because maybe you took time off to raise your children, or perhaps you were taking a sabbatical, or maybe you were taking care of a loved one who was sick, or maybe you were personally battling some sort of health issue, and now you're back in the game. For those, I think, one, you can work a little bit into your cover letter, potentially your resume, and you can briefly touch upon it in the interview process if asked, what was going on during that time. And I'd stick to the straight facts. Don't get too emotional with it. Don't get too nitty gritty in the detail. To say I was battling, I had a healthcare scare. But all you need to know now is I'm back to full strength. And here's what I've been doing to keep my skills sharp. While I was not working. When it comes to your resume and you're trying to fill that resume gap, there are a few different ways you can do this. One, consider online courses. And this is great stuff to be doing now, especially if you're unemployed. Yes, of course you are hunting for work and you're looking for something. Or maybe if you're like me and you've got children at home and now you're homeschooling and taking care of your children, and maybe the job search, you're kind of searching, but at the same time now playing, daycare provider and teacher and snack assistant and that sort of thing as well. Perhaps your attention's a bit divided and, of course it is. Something that I would suggest, if you can find the time, and I understand it doesn't work for everybody, something you can do is look into how you can develop your skills and keep a pulse on what's going on in your industry. So for instance, there are so many certifications that you can take online. There are so many e-courses you can take, whether it's through a college or it's through one of these numerous sites: Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, edX, Skillshare. And then there's other ones that are very specific, such as General Assembly and things of that nature. There's a lot of different courses out there. Look and see if there's something you can do that will help sharpen your skills. Dedicate some more time to networking as well, attending, there are a lot of virtual conferences going on. If you go to 10times.com, they actually have a section set up for online or virtual events. They have a lot of great conferences that you can attend from the comfort of your home. Eventbrite has also been doing a lot of stuff in that space. Other things you can do. Keep in mind, to fill a gap on your resume, you don't necessarily need to be getting paid for the work you're doing in order to put it on your resume. You could be volunteering your skill set, and you could have put that on your resume to help show that you are currently gainfully doing something. So for instance, there's something known as skill-based volunteer opportunities, SBV. There's a lot of sites out there, and Jen, I'm so sorry I did not send these to you ahead of time, but there's Catch a Fire, Volunteer Match. I think idealist.org might even have a section for this now. There's a lot of them out there, but if you Google skill-based volunteer opportunities or skill-based volunteering, you'll actually find loads of sites where you can offer up your skill set and use your expertise and help a nonprofit organization that frankly doesn't have the funds to pay someone to do this work, but you at least get some experience on there. It's a volunteer opportunity. Perhaps you'll make some great networking connections, but it allows you to help fill that void on your resume. You can also offer up your skills to friends that own businesses. It depends on what you do, of course. Now, something else that's just more of a what can you do to kind of tweak the resume? Keep in mind, because if this is a gap from the past, obviously you can't suddenly invent things that you did during that time. Hopefully it's far enough down that maybe it's at the bottom of the first page or it's on the second page, so it's not the first thing they're seeing. But something to keep in mind is that always think of your resume or your CV as a marketing document. This is you advertising your qualifications. It is not a black and white transcript of your work history and your education. And so you get to choose what details you provide and what details you omit. Not lying, just deciding what parts of your story do you want to tell that are most relevant and will paint you in the most positive light. What I mean by this is that when you're putting your experience in, you can decide whether you're going to list month and year for start and end date or just year. Because depending, and test it out. You have to be consistent though, so you got to figure out which of those two methods is going to look the best on your resume and paint you in the best light. But in some instances, if you remove the months and just put years, it makes a short-lived job look a little bit longer. Depending on when you were unemployed, it may be I ended one job this year and it may look like I started the next job the next year, and it doesn't show the gaps as much. And so you can only pick one method. You can't flip-flop back and forth between the different jobs on your resume, but choose the one that's going to paint you in the best possible light. Either include start month and year, end date and year, or just do year and year. And that one I like. Sorry, I know I spent a lot of time on that one. We've got a little bit more time. Eric, where do we find the video? So there's two things. One, if you go to our Facebook page on TopResume and you click on videos, or if you go to our Facebook page and then you put a slash and write live, you can find any live videos I've done in the past, and I've done quite a few of them. Also, in a lot of the articles, we started embedding the videos, and on YouTube. TopResume's YouTube page, there's a whole section where you can find all the videos I've ever done, you know, outside of those articles. Okay, Thaddeus, love your name, by the way. Do you have a fix your resume to fit different job descriptions or have several on? Do you have to fix your resume to fit job descriptions or have several on hand? Great question. Should you have 17 versions of your resume out there? I say you always have a base document that describes the type of job you're pursuing, and it's been written with 3 to 5 job descriptions in mind, and that's your base document. And then when you're going to submit your resume for a particular application, you are going to make minor tweaks to that base resume. You might reorder some of your bullet points so that the one that would be most important would be at the top. You might swap out terminology so that the wording matches up perfectly with that job description. I always think of it as kind of an evolution of your resume, not necessarily a complete reworking. You should never have to overhaul your resume for each application. If you find yourself doing that, then something's wrong. It means your base document needs to be reevaluated. If you're one of those people that says, I've done a lot in my career and I could either go this direction or I could go that direction. If you truly feel you could go 2 completely different directions and you're qualified for both and you're having trouble deciding which, or you're trying to keep your options open because it's just based on what's going on and where are their opportunities, yes, you would need a separate resume for each of those career paths. However, keep in mind you can only have one LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn will only let you have one LinkedIn profile. And they go hand in hand these days. I mean, it's not enough to have a very polished, professional looking resume. You also have to advertise your candidacy consistently online, on paper, and face-to-face. Well, these days, face-to-face through a video, right? And so keep that in mind. That's why I always urge people to try and stick to one track, to do your research, explore, identify where the best opportunities are, and use that as the foundation of your job search, because whatever your job goals are, that dictates how you're going to prioritize different information on your resume, what you're going to omit, what you're going to highlight, what's going to happen to your LinkedIn profile, how are you positioning that, how you're talking about yourself when you're networking, and also how are you prioritizing networking opportunities and connections as part of your job search. If you're going more than one path, then it doubles the work, frankly. So keep that in mind. Patrick, how would you handle shifting from one career path to another? Great question. Okay. So for example, project management to product management. Whenever you're making a transition from one career to another, and we do have a really beautiful article that has a sample resume in it. So Jenna, if you could find the article on changing careers, I want to say the cover picture, it has like a brown background to it. It's like 7 changes to make if you're changing your resume, if you're changing careers, something like that. First of all, you may not have a 2-page resume anymore, and that's okay. If you're shifting, you're going to reevaluate each piece of information on your resume. As you're getting ready to update your resume, what I do recommend doing is finding people that work in the field or industry that you're switching to. So say project management to product management. Talk to people in product management to get a better understanding of the good, the bad, and the ugly in that role, how most people kind of develop, and what they deem to be the most important skills for somebody in that line of work. What are they looking for when they're looking at people's resumes? What's important to them? Take that information and incorporate it into what you're finding when you're looking at, say, 3 to 5 job descriptions that are for product management roles. And you're looking for how are they describing certain pieces of experience? What skills are they looking for? Now you're going to go back, reevaluate your resume. Also think about what you didn't include on your resume because it didn't seem important at the time. And now you're sitting there reevaluating your resume with the lens of this new career path and saying, okay, so are these things still all important and considered desirable and attractive in someone who's now pursuing this type of role? Are there other things I've done in previous roles that I didn't include on my resume that now would make more sense to add in because that would actually help boost my candidacy for this type of role? Are they asking for this type of experience? And I did that, but we call it something different, especially in product management and project management. There are a lot of crossover skills, so you definitely want to take advantage of those and make sure you're incorporating all that in. But in some instances, you just may need to translate your experience and skills into terms that are more product management friendly. So keep that in mind as you're evaluating your current resume. The more you learn about your new career path, and that's why I say go beyond just job listings, research it online, start reading online publications for that line of work, and talk to people, because they'll also help you understand what are things you've done that actually are very similar to what they're asking for, because then you can translate and reposition your resume into terms that your new target employer will appreciate. Okay, someone was asking, like, how do you know about the keywords, Yogesh? I don't know what KRA is, so what kind of keywords would you use? So there's no way for me to say, oh, these are the keywords, because it's going to really depend on what type of role you have. You know what, I forgot to mention this before, but if you're trying to figure out what keywords are routinely popping up, I told you the old school way, print out the documents, highlight them. I completely forgot to tell you the electronic way. There is another way that's easier that you can identify what are some of those words. Try using Wordle, Wordle.net. It's a word cloud generator. What do? You copy in the job descriptions, all of them at once. Avoid the information that describes the company or says, oh, we're a equal employment, equal opportunity employer. Like, get rid of those blurbs. Don't include the blurb that talks about the company, or the blurb that talks about, how they're great employers, that sort of thing. Just put in the part that describes the role and your responsibilities if you got the job, and what the requirements and desired things are. Copy and paste all of that for all those jobs you found, and paste it into a word cloud generator. I have no affiliation with Wordle. It's just one that I found that I use, and it's free. Paste it in there and say, yeah, give me a word cloud, and you'll see which are the words that are routinely popping up. It will help guide you and identify which are the best ones that seem important because they're routinely popping up so many times. Okay. I am just about out of time. I'm going to look. So I have 8 to 9 years of experience, and the resume is 3 pages. Is that okay? I would get it to 2. 100%, unless you're in academia, unless you're in the scientific field, you should have it down to 2 pages. Unless there's a really, really good reason. If you spill slightly over into 3, it's not the end of the world, but if it's just spilling over, then there's probably a way to make it work on 2 pages, and that's what I would do. Trying to work on LinkedIn. Okay, you know what? I will 100% dedicate one of these to another one of these live chats to LinkedIn. I think it's really important. I'm not going to do it next week because I think I already had something that I promised someone I would do. But I am happy. I'm doing these every Tuesday. I'm happy to do one specifically on LinkedIn. Megan talks about her gap was to take care of her kids. Yeah, you know what, Megan? It's common. So I've been taking some courses. What's the best way? So if you've been taking courses and it doesn't result in a certification, at the bottom of your resume when you're putting in education and professional development, put in your degrees and that sort of thing, and underneath that put in the courses you've been taking, with the most recent up at top and working your way down. If you received a certification, if there's an initialism that comes, like CPA, Six Sigma, black belt, anything that would have an acronym or initialism at the end, you would put that at the end of your name, at the top of your resume. If it's something that's incredibly important, I would work it into the professional summary, especially if it suddenly boosts your level of attractiveness, your candidacy. If it boosts your qualifications, most certainly work it in there. I would also, in your cover letter, talk about, I took some time off to take care of my kids. However, here's how I've been keeping up on my skills. Here's what I've noticed, how the industry or blah, blah, blah has changed. Here's how I've kept up on that. And that's really what you're reiterating, both in the interview as well as in your application. And also your networking connections will be really useful. Oh, Harvard's offering several free courses. That's awesome. best heading points. Jenna, you're a rock star. Thank you for keeping up. At what point can I justify a 2-page resume? Entered the workforce in 2014. Just there, Andrea, you entered the workforce in 2014. You've got 6 years. You've got internships. I will say that once you graduate college, the high school stuff goes away. You can keep the high school stuff on while you're still in college. Once college is done, the high school stuff goes away. Definitely, Andrea, take a look at that article that we posted. That's about how many pages can your resume be, or how long should your resume be. I actually go in depth about how you can determine if it's time to justify a second page to your resume. How many bullet points under each job? Okay, you worked at a job for 26 years, Josie, but you had 3 moves within the company. So here's something to keep in mind. If you've been working at a job for a long period of time, but you've held different roles within that company. I mean, the company I worked at previously, I was there for 11, 12 years, something like that. And I think I had 5 different jobs over the course of that time. What's nice is you can put the company name, the start and end years for working at that company, but then you can break up your experience based on your job titles. So start with the most recent role you held, and you can write a blurb about that role. You can put in parentheses exactly how long you spent in that role. Put a little blurb about your role and responsibilities, and then use the bullet points. And I usually say a minimum of 2, because 1 alone just looks weird. Try and get a minimum of 2 if you're gonna have a section that's written and then bullet points. It varies. I normally stick around 5, but I've seen up to 7 and it still looks fine. You just want to be careful, make sure that it's all important. However, if you have multiple jobs and you're breaking it up between those jobs, it will actually work out well. When I say 3 to 5 or 3 to 7, I'm talking about per job title. So if you held 3 different roles, that gives you up to 15 to 21 bullet points in total for working there. So keep that in mind. Again, it's breaking it down. And that is important. If you've been at the same company for a long time, if your title has shifted, if your responsibility has shifted, you want to show those shifts. You want to show that progression, because it shows that they didn't just keep me around because they don't really, do a lot of firing. It's really because because you've been growing and evolving in that role. I am a little over time now. I'm looking at one right now, and then I'll just see. Okay, it looks for somebody who's looking for something very specific. Mahesh, depending on what you're looking for, you may want to work with, especially if you're at that executive level, you probably want to work with a professional resume writer. In truth, I couldn't sum up how to fix this or how to approach your resume other than what I've already talked about. So I would suggest doing that. Something else we do have, we have an article called, oh gosh, Jenna, 11 steps to writing the perfect resume, and we have a similar one on TopCV as well. It's basically what it does is it breaks down what pieces of information should you gather to then turn it into a resume. And so it helps you consider things you may have not thought could be included on your resume. It helps you gather everything, whether you're planning to write it yourself or you're planning to then take that information and hand it off to a professional writer. These are all the different pieces of information you should keep in mind. So if you can pull that article, again, I believe it's called 11 Steps to Writing the Perfect Resume on TopResume. If you grab that article, it's one of my older ones, but it's one of my favorite ones because it's a really nice blueprint as to what to gather. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in today. Again, my name's Amanda Augustine. I'm the resident career expert for TopResume, as well as our sister sites Top Interview and TopCV. Don't forget, if you haven't entered the contest yet, enter the resume makeover contest. We put the link in here a couple times. And also, if you want to talk more job search information, I am doing a webinar at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight for my alma mater, Marist College. They said it's open to anybody. You don't have to be an alumni or an alumnus in order to join, and it's also free. So the link is also in here. Brandy asked about how to turn a resume into a CV. We actually have an awesome article on that, Brandy. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we've kind of hit the end of our time. However, We do have a great article on how you turn it. In truth, resumes and CVs are really similar. And so it's not a huge difference. It's more about changing the paper size you're using, the document size. It's, changing to, more often than not British English, depending on where you're applying, those sorts of things. Slight information depending on what country you're applying for, may or may not now want you to include a photo, things like that. But more often than not, like a CV in the UK and a resume in the US are looking more and more similar every day, and so don't stress too much about it. But if you want, you could work with TopCV and they would translate your resume into a CV, and you could specify what countries you're planning to apply for positions in so that they can abide by the rules of that country. Thank you all so much. I will see you again next Tuesday, same time. The roots will continue to grow out. It's going to be a fun experiment for everyone involved. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone, and stay healthy and safe.